You guys out there?
Affirmative.
Yes.
I'm finally getting the hang of this.
Awesome.
Who would think? Who would think? Well, good morning.
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 Good morning.
Anybody have
Morning.
any news? No news. Losers. Uh, anybody have any questions? Anybody who's sitting for the July exam? Anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything? Take that as a no.
I am hitting analytical reasoning hard because I'm finding a very unbalanced test score right now.
Well, again, Joe, you want to balance. I think it's a conversation I had with Michael during the week. You want to balance what you can achieve with the time you put into something.
Well, I'm getting like 23 on the logical reasoning and like 23 on reading comp, and then like 10 or 12 on the analytical reasoning because of stupid mistakes I find when I go back.
Well, if you're getting 23s on the other two sections, could you take the test for me?
I mean, sure, logical reasoning, I don't even know on some of these how I'm doing it. I went back and looked, and on like 10 of them, I just kind of used the Schwartz. The other 4 didn't make any sense to me, so I went with the 5th and then got out of there.
That's awesome. But then, yes, then I agree, Joe. If you're that strong in the other areas,
Something's wrong.
that does make sense to double down. And again, in analytical, as I try to, because I'm looking at them from a different perspective than you guys are.
Mhm.
And I must say there is a trend, and it's, just me, but the trend, and there are definitely exceptions to this, but as I, because I'll just sit down and say, okay, let me start drawing this out so I can try to explain it to others. I must say, overall, the first and the second hypotheticals generally appear more approachable than the last two. Generally, again, there are exceptions. And when they're more approachable, I really can recognize it because it's just, they're going to ask you for, to order 7 things or 6 things, and the constraints are straightforward. So again, you need to be aware that it's, at most, it's a trend. But Joe, if you just are able to identify the two, if you're able to identify the 2 hypotheticals that, are designed, maybe there'll only be 10 questions, maybe they'll have 10 in the first 2 and 12 or 13 in the back 2. But I have found that, again, I stress with exceptions, that the first 2 hypotheticals are generally designed to allow you to get, say 8 out of 10 and have 15 minutes left.
Mhm.
And
then there's a trap in the last 2.
Well, I wouldn't phrase it as a trap, Joe. It's, some of law school, it's a trap if you're unaware. It's an ambush. That, that's correct insofar.
Yeah. Yeah.
This test is an ambush if you're not prepared, and you are. But if you're coming out of college and you have a 3.7 GPA and you're the head of the student council and you're involved in 3 voluntary organizations, and you're on the volleyball team, and you're this wonderful overachiever. The LSAT's an ambush.
Yeah, you want your 100 and it's never going to be,
Yeah. So,
or at least your 90.
so I know we've had some folks join us. Again, with respect to anybody taking July, any questions on what's going to happen in July or on your preparation, which should now be execution?
Do you still see the timer on the select test?
It's going to be in the top right-hand corner.
Then we are all set.
All right. Okay, so that's it. Nobody has any news. You're killing me. No news. All right. So I infer you all got the attachment.
Yes.
So, okay. So I'm not gonna, the video I'll address at the end, because the video really are just examples. But I'm writing this attachment to try to put in plain language what's going on. And if you can, if you're gonna understand anything that's abstract, like if you're gonna try to, there have to be some philosophers out there. There are some philosophers out there.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Philosophy is abstract thought, and it's often presented to the reader as fiction. And you could just read the fiction and enjoy it without understanding that it's a book of philosophy. And this reasoning is abstract. And the LSAT is kind of like a book of fiction. If you don't understand the philosophy that's behind it, you're not really getting it. And so that's what I was getting at, is I'm trying to, the connection between this test and law school is just, it's very strong. So I'm just now referring to the document I sent you. And, which I think I mentioned last time, but I just finished listening to a audio book by Neil Gorsuch, and Gorsuch is a Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. And during that audio book, he says that lawyers are trained in logical reasoning. So just stop and process that for a second. If lawyers are trained in the discipline of logical reasoning, doesn't it make sense that there's a section on this test reserved for logical reasoning?
Absolutely.
And so you're not just preparing for a test, you're preparing to become lawyers. I don't know if anybody can see it, but that my next favorite thing, well, this is actually my favorite. I'm sure you can't see it, but this is my little cup here, on which it says, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. And that's from Henry VI from William Shakespeare. And actually, Gorsuch actually references that. And he was pretty successful. They pretty much did kill all the lawyers.
Yes, Henry was kind of rough on the attorneys.
But again, there's a message in this, which is you're learning to reason. So it's not subordinate to your political views. Your political views are subordinate to your reasoning. And so you're a lawyer always first. This has got to be to your core, where you learn how to reason. So, to understand logical reasoning, you have to understand in a granular manner, which sucks, right? Because it takes time. But you have to understand in a gradual manner exactly what an argument is, and how is it you come to understand it. because we're talking about logical reasoning, which involves arguments. So again, what's an argument? And, in ordinary life, that's somebody who says to you, oh, you should be a lawyer because you argue well. Well, no, actually, that's not what an argument in law is. So, it can be understood to mean that there is can be understood to mean there's a disagreement at hand, but it doesn't have to be. The argument is how we proceed through inquiry. It doesn't have to be a disagreement. In other words, what I'm doing with you is presenting arguments, but I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just presenting arguments for the purposes of understanding how they're constructed. It may be directed at an adversary, so I have certainly argued in court, and that is absolutely disagreement. But again, what I'm doing as I'm sitting here now is I'm trying to communicate to you what I may understand, and that is what constitutes an argument. So understand that an argument is not necessarily to argue, and that it has a structure and form. And it is the mastery of that structure and form that will make you a lawyer, not your bloody politics. The and the form is, again, which we've discussed, is quite simple. It's reasoning. And all that means is your reasoning consists of, whether you want to call them evidence, premises, facts, claims, you can do all that. Doesn't matter. It's your evidence and your conclusion. That's it. There's nothing else. I mean, you can have background information, but that's it. So, what I've written down here is, in trying to bring this to life, because I see the error. I see the error all the time, which is either you haven't taken care with your evidence, so you're presenting to me as a premise something which itself is a conclusion, which means it has to be supported. In other words, when you present me with a premise, I'm supposed to genuflect, right? Because you're telling me that's a fact. Okay, but I get to question your facts. Now, not on the LSAT. LSAT is fact is a fact. But here, I'm saying if you can analogize to the evidence as being the DNA of an argument, right? Just think of it as DNA. Like if any one of us, I don't know enough about science, but it's fair to say that everyone who's listening to me has the DNA required to be a human being, right? So it's sufficient. Whatever it is we have is sufficient to be a human being. And if we lacked any given strand, again, I don't know the science, right? So I don't know if you lacked a strand, you wouldn't be a human being, or if you lacked a strand, you would have different traits than other human beings. But think of evidence as your DNA, and your conclusion is not done until your DNA is adequate to get it done. So when the DNA is adequate, whatever that is, it'll form a human. So when your evidence is adequate, right? Now your evidence is drawn in conjunction with the type of conclusion you've drawn. So, are you concluding something that's conclusive? So when you're concluding something, and again, that's what people who aren't lawyers do, is it's consistently a conclusion that exceeds the scope of the evidence. So you've claimed you're a human being, but you've only presented me with 13 chromosomes. Well, you're not. You can be indignant, but it doesn't change anything. Now, in thinking about that DNA, right, think about what evidence is, and this is the entire logical reasoning section. There are three types, basically, of evidence. There's permissive evidence. necessary evidence, sufficient evidence. And you can't be a lawyer without this kind of understanding, right? That you can build a case entirely on permissive evidence. And all permissive evidence means, like, is, I think it's, you know, it's helping my conclusion. It's not ensuring my conclusion, but it's helpful to my conclusion. So it's permissive. That's very different from necessary evidence. Because necessary evidence, if it's not present, you know, like if it's proved to be false, then my conclusion is toast. So necessary evidence, and again, that word necessary, think of synonyms and think how often you've seen on the exam the word required, right, instead of the word necessary. So something that is required is necessary, right? So necessary evidence means just that. So you have to be aware when you read a sentence, is that presenting evidence which is permissive, meaning I can do without it, it's helpful, but I can do without it. Or is it giving me information that is required, that is necessary, which means I cannot do without it. And finally, if, you know, arguments vary in their length and their complexity. Some, you know, again, it's an argument. When I say to you, if it rains, I will get wet, I just gave you an argument. Not much of an argument. It's an argument. Contains a premise and a conclusion. The premise is if it rains, the conclusion is I'll get wet, right? So that is an example of sufficiency, right? I don't need any. If you're telling me if it rains, I get wet. So that's sufficient evidence, but sufficient evidence need not be necessary evidence, right? Because there are other ways I can get wet other than through rain. So just stop and treat this like you would trying to understand philosophy from reading a book of fiction. You're walking it up the ladder. So you're going to walk these, you know, which is what we'll get to, these issues, assumptions, flaws, how to strengthen and weaken an argument. But how do you strengthen and weaken what you don't understand? How do you identify a critical missing part in what you don't understand? Or how do you identify something that's necessary but not stated for something you don't understand? So that word argument is really what's critical. And again, this thing about arguments, just stop. Even if, well, I'm sure you will all go to law school, but even if you don't, could you stop and reflect on whether or not the conclusion you're drawing is persuasive or conclusive, right? You know, in my life, 95, 98, 99% of all my conclusions have been persuasive, not conclusive, right? I've never proven any defendant guilty beyond any doubt, although jurors have found on occasion that I proved guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's persuasive, not conclusive, all right? So a persuasive conclusion allows you to be wrong. It gives it, there's an open area there, right? So it's much more, you know, if you think about, would it be fair to say that everyone who's listening believes that they are aware of the date of their birth? Is anybody not aware of the date? If somebody says, "What's your birthday?" Does anybody here say, "I don't know"?
No.
No.
Well, I want you to think about it. I'm saying this stuff isn't complicated. It just, you got to slow down. Well, if I say to you, if I were to ask each person to identify his or her birthday, is there anybody who would not be able to identify his or her birthday?
No.
So we're all on the same song sheet, right?
Yes.
And we're trying to understand what logical reasoning is, yes?
Yes.
So why don't I then suggest that insofar that each of you or any of you is telling me you're able to identify your birthday, that your conclusion exceeds the scope of the evidence you'll present me with. So I challenge anybody to prove your the day on which you say you were born. How do you, because you're saying it's, when you say to me, like if I were to say to you, Carolyn's my youngest daughter. If I say to you, Carolyn's birthday is May 2nd. Okay. I was there. Could I be wrong? Could I be wrong?
Yes.
Do you think Carolyn has any recollection of her birthday?
No.
Do any of you have a specific recollection of the day on which you were born?
No.
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 Okay. But everybody just went along with, I can testify, and I would testify, Carolyn's birthday is May 2nd. I could even give you the year. I could even give you the time. But you all agree I could be wrong.
Mhm.
Right? And we all agree that Carolyn doesn't have a clue. Well, Carolyn has no, would it be fair to say that any evidence that Carolyn can gather, remember that's a DNA, right? Would it be fair to say that any evidence that Carolyn can gather would be secondary, meaning it's not her own?
Yes.
So would it be fair to say you might consult a birth certificate if you wanted to establish the day on which you were born?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Could the birth certificate have contained an administrative error?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Matter of fact, Carolyn's does. Carolyn's birth certificate recites that she was born on May 3rd. She was not. She was born on May 2nd.
So is my
My
father.
grandmother's did too.
Oh, son of a bitch. So if, and I could just pursue this, but what I'm trying to get you to do is, because people will shut down, you know, and they'll say, well, that's stupid. Well, I'm not offering it to challenge anybody's recollection of, or, you know, proof of your birthday. I'm offering it to bring your attention to the difference between a conclusion that is warranted by the DNA you present me, the evidence you present me, and a conclusion that exceeds, right? And it's no more complicated than saying, to the best of my knowledge, if Carolyn says to me, to the best of my knowledge, my birthday is May 2nd, would you agree that that is a permissive conclusion?
Yes.
Does everybody get that? When you say, to the best of my knowledge, aren't you implying that may be wrong?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you see that that is a, so if you were to say to me, to the best of my knowledge, my birthday is, and then you were to present to me your knowledge would consist of your birth certificate, somebody who might have been present, hospital records, you know, you could, whatever, right? Your parents, if they're around, or they were there, or they care, or they weren't drinking at the time. So reflect on it, because in terms of when we get into flaw issues on the LSAT, they are all over this. They are all over. We just aren't taught to reason with precision until we go into some kind of profession. You know, and if you're a doctor, you're going to reason with precision in the field of medicine. If you're an engineer, you're going to reason, I hope, with precision in engineering. But lawyers proceed in reasoning, not in a single area of reasoning, but in reasoning overall. So just reflect on this. Would it be fair to say I've mentioned you should read textually?
Yeah.
But this is why. Because there's no way you can get, I don't know how else you would get here without changing the way you read and being more aware of language and the implications of What is the evidence you presented, right? Not what evidence would you like to be there. I don't care what you feel. I mean, respectfully, I don't give a rat's ass what you feel. Show me the evidence. So, and again, the evidence is the DNA. So when you're talking about a persuasive argument, you're talking about in legal world, generally, either a preponderance of evidence, which is a civil case, or you're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a criminal case. But they're both permissive arguments, not conclusive arguments, right? So when you're on the LSAT, unless you're looking at an issue where they're framing it as, you know, which of the following can be logically inferred? Okay, well, if you're saying logically inferred, then you want a conclusive conclusion, right? If you say which of the following must be true, I get it. You want a conclusive conclusion. I get that. But in the absence of those issues, overwhelming majority of arguments are presented with are presenting you with persuasive conclusions, and that's a very different matter, because persuasive, do you get it? To weaken or strengthen persuasive conclusions is pretty straightforward. So you just want to be thinking about that. Just mute everybody here. Okay. So when you have evidence that itself may be persuasive, but fails to establish a conclusion that is conclusive, you have engaged in a flawed argument. Do you get, we just did an example of that? In other words, couldn't everybody here give me valid, persuasive evidence for their date of birth? Yes?
Yes.
But do
Yeah.
you get, yeah, right, but you haven't proved your date of birth. And that's what I'm trying to get at here, is that be aware that the conclusion you draw dictates the scope of the evidence you have to present. That if we want a human, we have to produce the DNA required for you. All right. And again, looking at that evidence, right? So permissive evidence is helpful. It's not required. It can never, ever, ever be the case that permissive evidence is assumed to be true. Remember what the test is doing, right? The assumption on the test is defined as something that's unstated and critical to the argument's validity. Persuasive evidence, any single link in that chain, is never required. It's simply helpful. No argument has to have necessary evidence unless the argument is going to end up with a conclusive conclusion. So again, this is the art of persuasion. There are a bazillion books written on the art of persuasion. I don't think any of them go far off the topic of, if you want to persuade someone, don't bother telling them how you feel. Just show them facts and just establish that each fact is reliable. So when we're dealing with permissive evidence or persuasive evidence, okay, that's one thing. That's different from evidence that's necessary. Again, going back to these three categories of evidence, right? Permissive, necessary, and sufficient. And as you're reading the arguments, after you have read the entire argument, it should be reasonably clear to you what parts of those arguments represent permissive, necessary, or sufficient evidence, and they certainly should be distinguishable from the argument's conclusion. So necessary evidence. It's evidence that must be true for a conclusion to be valid. In other words, the conclusion cannot do without it. So a statement, again, if you're going to draw the conclusion that there's human life on some other planet, you know, and then we stipulate to human life requirements for human life. They're not permissive, right? I mean, to the best of my knowledge, oxygen is a requirement for human life. Water is a requirement for human life. Water is a requirement. Food is a requirement for human life. They're not permissive conditions. They're necessary conditions, right? And so the mere presence of a necessary condition doesn't bring about the conclusion, right? The mere fact that there's oxygen on a planet does not necessarily mean it's going to support human life. But the absence of the oxygen means there cannot be human life. So as you're looking at evidence, because when you identify, when you identify necessary evidence, you're identifying a statement assumed to be true. In other words, permissive evidence is not assumed to be true. You want it to be true, it's helpful, but if I negate it, it doesn't obliterate my conclusion, right? But a necessary piece of evidence obliterates it. So again, in my world, right, if you come into the world of law, you know, whether I'm arguing a trial case or an appellate case, everything pivots on the elements of a crime. And each element has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So if I have 4 elements, it is necessary, it is not permissive, it is necessary to prove each of the 4 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And if I fail to establish any one of the 4, then I lose. So necessary, and therefore I assume that each of the 4 elements of the crime have taken place. Because if any one has it, I lose, because my conclusion is obliterated. With respect to sufficiency, you know, that's basically the if-then statement, right? So sufficient evidence, whenever you're in logical reasoning, maybe a very lengthy argument, it may be a very short argument, but be aware that the word if, without exception, connotes sufficiency. And the fact that the word if is in the middle of the sentence doesn't change anything. If the word if is in the middle of the sentence, you can start the sentence with the word if. So, and the thing about if is, you know, again, you guys have no reason to be parsing, you know, the difference between if then and if and only if. And I suspect the only place we do that is in philosophy. I mean, maybe not, but, you know, but this is not a philosophy test. And I know a bazillion lawyers, and almost none of them know anything about philosophy, including me. But, so if then is, it represents in law a condition subsequent, a condition that hasn't taken place yet. So, you know, you're getting it on the LSAT, and I suspect there are folks out there saying, well, you know, go pick up your formal logic book. But lawyers don't pick up formal logic books. So your if then is my condition subsequent. There are only 2 types of conditions, antecedent and subsequent. Conditions antecedent are the ones that have already occurred. They're required. Conditions subsequent haven't occurred yet. That's why we have the word if. If it rains, I'll get wet. The condition subsequent for me getting wet is the rain. I promise you, you will hear this ad nauseum in law school. So when you're in the logical reasoning section and you see the word if, it's not formal logic they're testing you on. It's condition subsequent. If then just means that when one condition is in place, another condition will take place. It doesn't mean it's the only condition. So again, there's just a huge difference between if then and if and only if. Because if and only if then just simply says it's sufficient. So it rains, I'll get wet. It's not necessary. Again, there are no exceptions to this. Every if then statement cites a sufficient, comma, but not necessary, comma, condition. And you're tested heavily on it. So, you know, and again, I'd be in college and well, I actually didn't, show up a whole lot in college, but if I had, I would have, written stuff down and I would have memorized what I've written down, and then I would have been tested on definitions and I might have done better than I did. But that's not what this is. This is conceptual. So be aware of the power of the word if. It may be the most important word on the test. The word because may also be the most important word on the test, right? And that if always refers to a premise. And all it says is when that premise is present, the effect will come about, the outcome will come about. But it doesn't say that's the only way the outcome can come about. And that's the difference between if as opposed to if and only if, which you don't see a whole lot of. But if and only if says it's both necessary and sufficient, right? That if I change the statement, I say, I will get wet if and only if it rains. The first thing this test requires you to do is suspend reality, right? Because everybody knows there are other ways to get wet. That's not what we're testing you on. We're testing you on your ability to read with precision, which is to read textually, right? So the statement, if and only if it rains, will I get wet, says it cites both a necessary and sufficient condition, as opposed to if it rains, I'll get wet. Well, that's a sufficient but not necessary condition. So I just want to open it up there. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is anybody awake?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
It's just not the same as having you here live.
No, not.
No, it's not.
No questions. I'm good.
All right. So again, just going back, that evidence that is sufficient for an argument's conclusion, does everybody get that? Evidence sufficient for an argument's conclusion may not be necessary for that conclusion.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you got to think about this stuff. I'm saying it's like you take an example, you walk it up the chain, and eventually it becomes principle, philosophy, it becomes abstract. You get to understand it. So now I want to go into, again, when you're, what they do in logical reasoning is, since they changed the definition of the word fact, right? So on the LSAT, because you have to suspend reality. And again, that's no different than in a courtroom. I mean, in a courtroom, you're going to be, if you're a juror, the judge is, and I'm going to be shaking my head up and down, yes, you got to do this. The judge is going to be saying to you, the only thing you know about this case is what you hear in this courtroom. When there's in my life, when there have been crime scenes, oftentimes I've not been to the crime, meaning it's an area or maybe an intersection I've never been to. Well, I'm going to drive out and I'm going to spend whatever time is required at that crime scene to try to process that and incorporate that evidence into my presentation. But I had no knowledge of that crime scene. And that's what we expect of jurors. We expect jurors to come in there, you know, even if you live at that intersection, we're saying other than, well, you might not get picked for the case, but if you got picked, right, you would basically be required to suspend any impressions you had about that intersection if they would prejudice you one way or the other. So what I'm saying here is we suspend reality in law, and the LSAT suspends reality by giving you definitions that, you know, don't make sense outside of the test. So when they use the word fact, they're saying, no. Any statement we make for which we give no support is considered a fact. Okay. But answer choices can contradict those facts. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to, you can, again, it's really an interesting test, because I can tell you in an argument that, you know, I don't know, cows are pink. Okay. So for the purposes of the LSAT, cows are now pink. But if I want to weaken the argument, I can also look at an answer choice, and the answer choice will read, which of the following, if true, weakens the argument? So listen to those words. You're now directed, which of the following, if true, weakens the argument? Okay, well, if answer choice C says cows are also purple, well, that would weaken the argument, notwithstanding you were given as a fact, cows are pink. So this test requires you, again, you've got to read textually. So when you're developing an argument, let me just open it up for, because I'm done. What I wanted to get there was just a conversation about evidence. Is everybody clear that there are three types of evidence, right? And that evidence has to be constructed in conformity with your conclusion, whether your conclusion is permissive, and if it's permissive or persuasive, right? How persuasive are you trying to make it? Or is your conclusion conclusive, which means you're saying the thing must be true? So we okay on, I've got to be aware of my evidence. I've got to put my feelings in a little box, right? I can't wish my evidence to be true, and I can't wish evidence in there that's not present. If I leave the evidence out, is it fair to say it's not part of my argument?
Yes.
Okay. Well, do you get how you can take things for granted, not put it in an argument, and then get pissed off because somebody's saying to you, well, you didn't say that. Well, you got to say it, because I can't challenge it if you don't say it. Okay. Now, in this thing of constructing an argument, there are four elements. So you want to persuade someone, right? And the first thing you probably start with are facts. Facts are matters not in dispute. So again, this is a little different in real life, but on the LSAT, right, every statement for which no support is offered is a fact. Okay. Stop now. A fact is an explicit statement. An inference is the second part of any argument. So one part is you set forth your facts, and you do this conspicuously, obscenely aware that you've got to meet your burden. So your burden is either a persuasion, which could be more or less, right? You could be trying to persuade somebody is, yeah, it's just more likely than not. You could be trying to persuade someone beyond a reasonable doubt. Or you could be trying to persuade someone that it's conclusive. There is no alternative to it, right? So in those three worlds, you start out with facts, and they've got to be facts, right? Because somebody like me is going to cross it. You may tell me it's a fact, but I don't give a rat's ass what you tell me. Right? I'm going to challenge it unless I stipulate to it. So, but do you get how somebody could come into court and without thinking about it, they would, you know, if it was important for me to, you know, for your date of birth to matter, if that were important to a case and you testified on direct that you were born on May 2nd and that were actually important, do you get, I'm going to cross-examine you on that. You guys get that?
Yes.
The things you're taking for granted, right? Like your date of birth. Well, I don't care what your date of birth is. But maybe that has to do with whether you're going to be sentenced as a juvenile or not, right? Maybe that has to do with whether or not you were old enough to buy alcohol or vote or whatever, right? That might be really important.
Credible witness.
I'm sorry?
Might be disproven with that typo, and then you have an uncredible witness.
Well, it might be at least could. I don't have to disprove it, Joe, but how about if I cast doubt on it?
Right.
Right? So if you cast doubt, if a witness makes several claims, you don't have to disprove. I mean, it'd be nice if you can, right? But what if you're breaking it down? You're saying, well, this person just made 12 claims. Well, what if I can get the witness on the stand to say, you know, I'm really not sure on 5 of those 12 claims?
Yep.
Would you agree the jurors listening to that might now give that witness's testimony somewhat less weight?
Mhm.
That's all there is to this. So to do that, there's a second part of an argument, which is the inferences you draw. The inferences are not themselves facts that are not challenged. Again, facts that are stipulated to is one thing. Facts that survive examination, that's one thing, right? Inferences are a wholly different matter, right? And the inferences are things you're calling facts, but themselves are derivative of facts. So again, that you know, I use that cell phone example, you know, because it really is a wonderful, to me, way of expressing what an inference is, and every one of us does it. You know, the phone rings, that's a fact, it rang. The phone number appears, it's a fact, that number appears. Perhaps a name appears that would accompany the phone number. Well, that's a fact. Nobody's disputing that, right? And then based on those facts, you say, oh, hi, George. Well, that's not a fact. That's an inference because you don't know it's George. Does everybody get that?
Yes.
So the inference, the definition of the inference, right, is it's something you're claiming to be a fact. In that it follows from what you believe you have established as factual. Okay. So if you were actually, you know, writing up, how am I going to argue, which, to go back to the very beginning of this, right? To argue it, you know, when I don't, it's not about raising my voice. It's not about me cursing at you. It's not about me being demonstrative in my nonverbal. I can do all that and often do that, but that's not an argument. An argument is poetry. It's carefully constructed with a purpose and a design. So the design here is 1, I have facts. 2, I have inferences. Now the inferences are going to be attacked by someone to whose benefit it would be to attack those inferences. So I've got to now, you know, how will these inferences be attacked? So an inference is something you claim to be a fact that is drawn from or based on facts that you claim have been proven. That's the second major area in developing an argument. The third major area, which is just, it's glorious, is you don't know what you don't know. You know, and if you haven't done the work, there's going to be an awful lot you don't know. And you know, in regular life, you just get to be as damn sure of yourself as you want to be. You know, evidence or no evidence. But information unknown to you is terribly important. So again, you're writing these 3 boxes, right? And the first box is, what am I claiming to be a fact? Second box is, what am I claiming can be inferred from those facts so that I can claim this inference as a fact? Third box, have I really limited this area of I don't know what I don't know? You know, you can find out a lot of what you didn't know. And that's what lawyers do. So again, if I'm going to charge someone in a single person ID with a robbery in the dead of night in poor lighting conditions on the corner of a busy intersection, if I'm going to charge that person, I'm going to make sure that that person does not have an identical twin. You know, it's the way you think just becomes more careful, more explorative, right? It's I can't imagine not being a lawyer. Just so much fun. Well, it is. It's like, you know, like what's not to love it? And again, it has to be, you're a lawyer first. And if you can't be a lawyer first, if you've got to be, you know, something else first, don't do this. Because everything else needs to be subordinate to the lawyer. Meaning, I don't mean in society, I mean to the way you reason. So that's the third category. And the fourth category is, you may be aware, you may not like the fact, but you may be aware that there are facts in opposition. There are facts that are not consistent with the conclusion you've drawn. And again, that's human nature. You know, again, I can think back as a kid, right? So I grew up outside of Yankee Stadium. The only reading I did until I was about 28 was the sports page. And, you know, if the Yankees won a game, I couldn't get to the New York Post soon enough. And it was like a love letter, reading every word of the article because they won. If they lost the game, I wouldn't buy the Post. So I'm saying it seems to me it's natural to embrace what you agree with and shut down what challenges what you agree with. You absolutely must lose that. This is not a presidential election. This is law. And you've got to understand the other side. How in God's name do I cross-examine the other side if I don't understand their argument? How would we ever, if you want to promote what you consider immigration reform, which I may or may not consider reform, but if you want me to represent you and protect what you believe is to protect the rights of certain parties, don't I have to be able to go into court and address the arguments to the contrary? Do I just like get to go into court and start calling the other side names? They're racist, they're bigots, they're ignorant? Or do I actually have to go in there and understand their arguments, though they are contrary to my own? Have I mentioned the test is psychometric? So those are your 4 boxes. Facts that are not disputed, inferences you claim to be facts, information unknown to you, and the facts that are in opposition. All 4 of those need to be present to construct an argument correctly. When you're done, if the evidence you rely on which will be challenged, is questionable, unpersuasive, disconnected, or incorrect, the argument's DNA will fail to establish the conclusion drawn. Okay. So again, I want you to try to think about this as clinically as you're capable. That if my DNA is inadequate, right? Whether it's because I relied on questionable evidence or, you know, the evidence was fine, it was just unpersuasive. Or the evidence doesn't get me to the, it falls short of the conclusion. Then the argument's going to fail. So again, I just, you know, you want to take note of that. An argument's conclusion can fail as a result of tainted evidence, meaning it's not reliable, or as a result of its inadequacy. And that really is the flaw issue, where it's not that your evidence is not tainted, your evidence is inadequate. You know, if you're hearing, I have an example. So I present reliable evidence, and each fact is validated and conceded, right? So these are all validated and conceded, but the conclusion I draw exceeds the scope of the otherwise valid evidence, and the argument will fail. And this is, you know, so I have here, okay. So what I'm setting up here is this would be analogous to the issue that they have. Which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? That's what they'd be testing you for. They could test you on anything, but typically that's where they would go. And again, I want to go back to analogize this to now thinking about how do you want to tell someone, how do you want to inform someone what your date of birth is? And you'll, if you're careful, you'll say, to the best of my knowledge, my birthday is, in Carolyn's case, May 2nd, to which any rational human being who's not a lawyer listens to that and says, what are you, an asshole? What do you mean, to the best of your knowledge? It is to the best of my knowledge. So yeah, maybe I'm an asshole, but I don't know my date of birth. So here's my example, which again is that cell phone, but here's a number, right? So we have this number, 914-234-5758. That's on my screen. The name Nellie Orr is on my screen. Nellie Orr is personally known to me. These are all factual. The number appearing on my cell phone screen is a number I recognize as being associated with Nellie Orr's cell phone. That's my evidence. That's my DNA. All formally established and stipulated too, right? But what's the conclusion? And again, this to me is very analogous to the date of birth thing. So if I push the talk button, I say, hi, Nellie, well, that seems very probable. But it could be somebody else using Nellie's phone, in which case my conclusion is wrong, even though all of my evidence is valid, right? When you say, hi, Nellie, again, it's just being careful. Do you guys get, when you say, hi, Nellie, that represents a conclusive conclusion? Everybody get that?
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's really what the test is after. Couldn't you have said, hi, Nellie, is this you? Wouldn't that, you're not then saying, hi, Nellie, you're saying, hi, is this Nellie? Maybe hi. But when you say, hi, Nellie, you're not reasoning logically, because your conclusion exceeds the scope of your evidence. So it's probable, right? But everybody gets somebody else could be using Nellie's phone. And then I have here is after I could ask, is this Nellie, right? Had I done so, I would have gathered an additional powerful piece of evidence. Does everybody agree? If I had said, is this Nellie, and received a reply, I would have more evidence. Nobody get that?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but this is what it is. I say, oh, okay. Now, if the voice on the other end answers yes, it'd be fair to say I have evidence of a voice, and it might be familiar to me, and it confirms what I suspect. So if I ask, is it Nellie? And somebody says yes, does everybody understand I have now gathered additional evidence, right? If the voice is one familiar to me, that's even more evidence confirming what I suspected. I'm offering this for the principle that the more valid DNA you have, the more compelling an argument you make. So, up to this point, does this make sense? Okay, because yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always good to hear yeses. I'm sitting out here all by myself.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have nobody.
That makes sense.
You're not by yourself, Peter. We're there with you.
You've always got the dog, too. Where's Shelby?
Shelby's inside. It's kind of
Oh,
hang out in the air conditioning when we have this kind of weather.
Might be all by yourself then.
Yeah. All right. And what I'm going to do then is go to exam 82 and try to go over some of these individual questions. My point in doing this is the test is a book of fiction, and it's really testing you on a philosophy. All right. So, when you can reason this, when you understand what they're testing you on, you got a shot. But if you don't understand what they're testing you on, if you're never getting the philosophy, you keep reading the fiction, right? But you don't get it's attached to philosophy. You'll never learn the philosophy because you just keep reading different fiction, right? So if you keep looking at the LSAT like it's disconnected from something having to do with law, which is logical reasoning, you're never really going to get your arms around this. All right. So I sent along the videos, and I'll be happy to open this up. If I remember correctly, right? I sent two videos. One on, they're both from Prep Test 82. I believe one of them went from 6 to 11 or something, and then the other one from 12 to 16 or something like that. Is that about right?
Yes.
So,
Six.
okay, so I'm more than happy just to open this up. Let's start with that first video where I believe we had from 6 through 11. And if you were struggling with any one of these, shout it out and let's go over it. Otherwise, I'll just take it in order. Okay. I'll put this on mute then, and then we'll open it up for discussion after I break each one down. All right, so I'm looking at number 6, and that issue was one actually that I just referenced. Which one of the following is most strongly supported by the statements above? So think about this as what we just did, right? What is most strongly supported? Not just supported, but what seems to. So when you're doing this, you're really looking at the language, because what's going to be most strongly supported is going to flow from what's been previously established. So you don't want to speculate. you want to stay within the DNA that you've been given, all right? And say, well, if you tell me this, here's what's next. Okay, so I have here that researchers studying athletes found that those who played mainly for the love of their sport actually had sharper vision during athletic competitions than those whose main goal was winning a trophy or a championship. And you stop, you're reading textually, right? And you say, what did I just learn? I was directed to researchers. They were studying athletes. They found two types of athletes, those who play for the love of the sport and those who play to win. Why did that come up? Because the researchers discovered that those who played mainly for love had sharper vision during the competition. I got it. So now there's a connection between my love of the sport and my having sharper vision than someone who's playing to win. Okay, let's see where this goes. That's my first DNA. The vision of the first group. Okay, well, the first group were the people who love the sport. So I want to make sure that I remind myself. The vision of those who love the sport was sharper, and that is that word because. And the word because, I say, is, if it's not the most important word on the test, it's very close. So, okay, so why is, let's say I love the sport. So why is my vision sharper? And it's because the concentration necessary for acute vision during an activity is typically possessed to a greater degree by those whose attention is focused on the activity itself. So I draw a couple of things from that. My vision is sharper because I'm concentrating, right? And it just goes, then it's just going on to say, you know, it's, so people who love the sport, if you want to say like what comes next, well, people who love the sport are concentrating to a greater degree than people who are playing for, to win. So that's all my mind does. I want to open it. Is everybody okay with what I just did?
Yeah.
Because this is what you have to do. So now I'm just looking for the words. Okay. A, winning a trophy or a championship is not important to athletes who play mainly for the love of the sport. I have no reason to believe that. B, if an athlete's main goal during athletic competition is winning, that athlete will lack the concentration necessary for adequate vision. That's not a question of his not having adequate vision.
Hey,
It's
Peter.
mind having better vision.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have volume 6. So which exam number is for volume 6? Because it seems like I'm missing prep test 82 from volume 6.
I don't think prep test 82 is in volume 6. Prep test 82
Online.
was an individual exam, and we're reading it from the digital format. But that said, I am reading it verbatim. So if you don't, I'm saying if you don't have 82, oh my. But yeah, no, 82 is not in volume 6. So C says, athletes who play mainly for love of their sport concentrate more on the sport itself during athletic competitions than do athletes whose main goal is winning a trophy or championship. Does everybody get that C is the answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So all you got to do is keep practicing and you'll go to law school. I'm not reading DNA. I could care less. It's a psychometric test. They're measuring, do you have conviction in yourself? Do you believe in yourself? You know, and you don't do that before you're ready, and it may take a frustratingly long period of time. But again, if you don't believe in yourself, I can't imagine who will. So that was 6. And again, the goal is you're not always,
I just have a question. I mean, in studying where I'm at, I'm still at the stage where I would still read D and E. Is that okay for now?
yes, Beth, that's okay for now. But you just want to beware. But yes, again, don't, yes, that's fine for now. But
It's more like a comfort.
I'm sorry?
It's more of like a comfort thing in the beginning for me.
Yes, Beth. So it needs down, it's like training wheels. If you're going to, you're swimming against the current when you read D and E. Well, let me rephrase that, Beth. You're not swimming against the current. You know, if you read answer choice C and you're not really sure, then you should read D and E, right? But what I'm saying is when you read textually, when you change this way you read, and I say, I know what the issue is, right? So if you're going to require me to say what's most strongly supported, well, it's really got to flow from the language you gave me, unless you're going to give me a Yale question, right? So if you give me a Yale question, that's one thing. But question number 6 is not a likely place for that. And if it's a Yale question, I'm not going to recognize, you know, my mind's going to produce blue, and the answer choices are going to be, you know, red, purple, green, orange, and, you know, mauve or something. And it's going to be no blue. It's crap. That's a Yale question. So what you're trying to do is, so it's not wrong to read D and E when C is not clear, but then you need to reflect on why is C not clear? And
Okay.
is it, you don't think, is it because of the way you're reading, or is it the psychology of it? You know, that maybe you're accustomed to double checking stuff, and maybe you're a very careful person. You know, you're dotting all your I's and you're crossing all, you know, it's really an interesting test. You know, I think of it, you know, Vicky, my wife, Vicky is a million times more attentive to detail than I will ever be. She is a million times more careful and cautious than I will ever be. And yet when she took this test, she got into a position where, you know, she could look at C, say, no, I got to go now. And I think it really will help if that's what's holding it up.
Yeah, no, it's more of, I think, again, that probably questioning myself, so.
Yeah, you got, yes, you need to get, it doesn't have to be today, but yes, that has to be addressed.
Okay.
Number 7. So here's an assumption, right? So again, go back to everything we discussed. It's all right here. And saying, okay, let me see here. What's a statement that must be true for this conclusion to be valid, which means I need to identify the conclusion. Okay, economist. So Cheschem, chemical manufacturer located in Chester, uses natural gas for its enormous energy needs. Stop. That's just a premise, right? Again, whether you want to call it a fact, evidence, it's just, you're informing me of something, right? You're informing me that this company is in this business, in this place, and they produce gas. Okay. Currently, natural gas costs twice as much in Chester as it does in Tilson. You stop and you digest it. Okay, so if I drive over to Chester, I'm going to pay $1 a gallon, right? And if I go to Tilson, it's only going to be 50 cents a gallon, currently. Got it. Next sentence. If the cost of natural gas in Chester becomes more than twice in Tilson, Cheschem will move its manufacturing operation to Tilson. Okay. So let me stop. So now I get it, right? Because you're saying this company uses natural gas, and that's their limit, right? Their limit is twice the price. So I get that. So you're saying if If the cost of natural gas becomes more than twice, the company's moving out. I completely understand where they're going. Okay. And again, these are all premises. Okay. And so likely the conclusion. So if the cost of natural gas in Chester increases at all, Cheschem will move its manufacturing operations to Tilson. Okay, well, for that statement to be true, it must be the case that when Chester increases its price, that the price in Tilson will not also increase. In other words, you're taking Tilson off the table. You're really saying that this is X to X, right? Meaning 50 cents to $1, right? And then the conclusion is, so if the cost of gas in Chester increases, so let's say it goes up to $1 okay, then the company's moving out. Well, no, I mean they might move out, but if the gas goes up to $1 in Chester, but goes from 50 cents to 52 cents in Tilson, then they wouldn't move out. So I'm saying this work is you practice this now. You know, I've seen this before. It's obviously a different example, but I've seen the very same argument. So that's going to be the answer. The answer is you're assuming, and again, I don't have the exact words, right? But you're assuming that if, in fact, that if they are moving out, that the cost in gas in Tilson did not also go up equally. Does that make sense? Everybody okay? Talk to me. No talk.
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
But that's what you practice now. And if you don't take the test until November, that's fine. You'll begin law school in August, you know, next year. But you got to get this down. And God, it's going to be helpful in law school. Okay, A, Cheschem spends far more on natural gas than on any other. Why in God's name would anybody pick A? I mean, I don't get it. Honest to God, I just, you know. B, the price of natural gas in Tilson will not increase. Don't know about you, but I'm kind of thinking that's the answer. Yes, talk to me.
Yes.
Mhm.
And again, look how that conclusion is phrased. So if the cost of natural gas in Chester increases at all, kabish, at all, a bloody penny, then they're moving. And for that to be true, it must be the case that natural gas in Tilson does not increase at all. And again, Beth, I would absolutely encourage that during this period where you're preparing, you continue to read B, C, D, and E, right? I'm C, D, and E. But you're just
See,
trying.
this one I was okay with.
Oh, cool. Very
Because
cool.
that was, yeah, that one, that was immediately what came to my head was that there would be, like you said, it's simple.
Well, I don't know that it's, you see, now,
Well, I'm seeing it's more apparent, I think, to me.
yes, but you know, things can be apparent that are really quite complicated. So yes, but absolutely, but that's wonderful because that undermines your initial statement, you know, which is your reluctance to pull the trigger, because here you're saying number 7, you did pull the trigger. So
Correct.
that's terrific. Everybody else okay with number 7?
Yes.
Yeah, let's take a look at number 8. Aw, cuttlefish.
Mhm.
Anybody have a cuttlefish?
No,
We
they're,
have cuttlefish. Maybe Shelby we can feed the cuttlefish to Shelby.
she wouldn't eat it.
No, why not?
They are ugly.
I don't know that Shelby is actually moved by the appearance of food. All right, see what we have here. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain why cuttlefish use their startled display? I can't wait to find out. Okay, but I get the issue that the cuttlefish use these displays, and we're trying to help explain. How come you do? Hey, so I got the cuttlefish on the stand, you know? I bet someone thinks, so what's with the display, Mr. Cuttle? You know, so here's what we have. When researchers discovered that cuttlefish have the ability to make themselves suddenly appear larger, they presumed that this behavior, called a startle display, was used to scare off predators. Stop, digest, right? Okay, so we're talking about researchers. They see the cuttlefish blow itself up, right? And quite reasonably to me, right? Just saying, well, hey, one possible explanation for that is you're blowing yourself up to scare off predators. I got it. Next sentence. A long-term study, however, reveals that cuttlefish never use startle displays to scare off predators, right? But instead only use such displays to scare off small fish that do not prey on cuttlefish. And again, I've seen this before. So for me, you're connecting the evidence in the first statement, which is we're trying to help explain why they use this display. And we're informed that the initial theory is to scare off predators. Now, this new study says, well, they're actually not scaring off predators. They're scaring off small fish who are no threat to the cuttlefish, right? So that doesn't make sense, right? Why would you blow yourself up to scare off a small fish that's no threat to you? But it does make sense that you would blow yourself up to scare off a predator. So connect the dots. What do you think the small fish attract? If you were a cuttlefish, right? And these small fish were what they wanted to hang around because they really think the small fish, they think it's really cool to be cuttlefish. Like they have little cuttlefish fan clubs and stuff, right? Do you think that if the small fish were attracting the predators that actually will feed on the cuttlefish, that it might make sense for the cuttlefish to blow themselves up to scare the small fish away?
No, it's
Yeah.
should be for the bigger fish.
I'm sorry?
Well, they're blowing up their appearance to scare off the smaller fish. I don't think that makes sense. I think they would do that to something that is dangerous to them, a predator.
Okay, let's hold on there, Joanna. Is it fair to say that within this argument, we were told that there was, and initially there was a hypothesis, a theory, and the theory was the startle display was used to scare off predators, right? That's the first sentence. So you're making now it may or may not be correct. You may find that to be incorrect or not, but and it does kind of make sense, right? Now, the second sentence says, but they don't use the display to scare off the predator. They use it to scare off the small fish. Now, that does not make sense because the small fish don't prey on the cuttlefish.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be some explanation for their blowing themselves up when the small fish are present,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're not talking about them blowing themselves up any other time.
Right.
So what if immediately behind the small fish are the predators who will eat the cuttlefish? Can you see the three of them line? Can you see
Yes.
the cuttlefish are in Florida? Because that's where you'd want to be if you're a cuttlefish. The small fish are in Georgia on their way to Florida.
Right.
And the predators, because they're predators, they come from New York.
The Bronx.
So that's basically what you're looking to connect the dots. So do you guys see that? Now I'm just looking for, now maybe your mind doesn't produce that. That's okay if your mind doesn't produce it. Then look at the answer choice and say, well, does A explain this? A says cuttlefish feed primarily on small fish and mollusks. Well, that makes no sense because then why would they blow themselves up, right? They'd eat the small fish.
Mhm.
B, groups of small fish are likely to attract the cuttlefish predators. Doesn't that sound like it makes
Yes.
sense?
Yes, definitely.
So it is not the case that you're going to read these arguments and always have the answer choice in your mind. That is going to be the case when for you it's a level 1 or 2. It's like what Beth was saying back on question number 7, right? Is that regardless of whatever difficulty was assigned to question number 7, for Beth, that was a level 1 or 2 because she was able to formulate the answer before ever looking. You don't have to be able to do that to get this right. So if you got through the argument in question number 8 and you said, you know what, I don't really see where they're going, but I do understand everything that was written, you're going to be fine. Does everybody see that B is the answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is what you do. You just practice. Forget about again, if you're taking the July test, you need to be on the clock. But if you're not taking the July test, the clock is your enemy. It's not your friend. 9. I want to strengthen the argument. Okay, let me get the argument. You know, if the winner of a promotional contest is selected by a lottery, the lottery must be fair, giving all entrants an equal chance of winning. Okay, so that's a statement, and it's setting out like goalposts here, right? That if there's going to be a winner selected by a lottery, the lottery must be fair, and then it really kind of defined fair, right? That every entrance has an equal chance of winning. I got that. Okay. Now here's the word since, which is a synonym for the word because. Since 90% of the winners selected by the lottery in a recent promotional contest submitted their entry forms within the first 2 days of the 30-day registration period, it is clear the lottery did not meet the fairness requirement. And again, just stop for a second. So you need to pick up that the conclusion here is the last clause. It is clear the lottery did not meet the fairness requirements. Okay, I got that. So I want to strengthen the argument that the lottery was not fair. Okay. And what is the evidence? Well, the evidence immediately precedes the conclusion. In other words, the word since means because. So the conclusion that it is clear the lottery did not meet the fairness requirements depends wholly on the DNA that's in that last sentence. And that is, since 90% of the winners selected by the lottery submitted their forms during the first 2 days. Because of that, right? 90% were in there in the first 2 days. It's clear that the lottery was not fair. This is so heavily tested. It's the difference between percentages and real numbers. And there's zero chance that you're not going to be asked about this. So if I want to strengthen the argument that the lottery wasn't fair, don't I want to say that, you can make up a number, make up the number 100. Let's say there were 100 people participating in this contest. Would it be fair to say it's not fair if over the 30-day period, 3 people registered in each of the 30 days? Well, you know, whatever, just say 3.3. But you get, would it be fair to say it would not be fair if the registrations came in, you know, pretty much evenly? How about if we did it weekly? How about if in this 30 days, right? How about if in the first week there were 25 registrants, second week 25, third week 25, fourth week 25? Would it then be fair to say it's clear that if you're saying 90% of everybody who won entered in during the first 2 days, would it be fair to say we've strengthened the argument that the lottery probably was not fair? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's gonna be I mean, they can flip it the other way. I mean, wouldn't the lottery be fair if 90 of the 100 people who entered the contest entered it during the first 2 days? Wouldn't then this lottery be fair?
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to strengthen the argument, so it wasn't fair. So that means that didn't happen. So now I'm going to look at their answer choices. A, the family members of the organizer of the contest were not permitted to participate. Okay, that's not helping me. B, the manner in which the contest winner would be selected was publicized prior to the selection. Okay, that's really not helping me. C, the contest entry forms were submitted at a consistent rate throughout the registration period. That does help me, right? Because that's going to, okay, there were 25 per week for 4 weeks. Keep reading, but C looks like the answer. D, the rules of the contest were posted conspicuously by those who organized the contest. Well, no, that makes it sounds like it was fair. And E, the number of people entering the contest far exceeded the expectations, but that doesn't mean they all registered or didn't register in the first 2 days. So the answer is C. You guys see it? Does it make sense?
Yes.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, our time has come to an end. I don't know what I'll do with the rest of my day. What shall I do? So, it's time for you now to go away. Have a wonderful Sunday. Have a wonderful week. If you get arrested, give a call.
Thank you, Peter. Oh, yeah, anyway, tomorrow, okay, Peter?
Well, if you want to make it a double header, that'd be great.
Yeah, I plan on not getting arrested.
All right. Call it anyway.
I make no promises, but I will try to stay out of jail.
All right. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
You.
You too,
Have a
Peter.
good
Thank you.
Fourth.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Happy 4th, everybody. Yeah. That's right.
You as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.